Hello everybody and thank you for joining us. My name is Aurelio Paurelis and today I'm happy to share with you some of the latest innovations of Dundas BI 5. Now just before we dive into what's new in Dundas BI 5 and show the highlights, I do know that some of you are completely new to the application and to Dundas as a whole, so I want to share with you a very brief introduction and then we can dive right into it. So Dundas has been around for 25 years now, delivering different products, always focused on data visualization, BI analytics. Our motto throughout the different products that we offer in our product line was always to make sure that all the common use cases, all the things that you need to do in every application is very easy to do. But then going beyond those things, this is where we really differentiate and go the extra mile. This is where we give you the option to achieve all different advanced use cases you have and really tailor the solution to meet your exact requirements. And that's exactly what we did with Dundas BI. Dundas BI is a full end-to-end BI application offering all the capabilities you need from data preparation to analytics, presentation, and collaboration. And everything is powered by Open API. So that gives you immense flexibility, whether you can achieve the requirements you need right out of the box with different requirements, with different capabilities available to you in the application, such as customization or advanced configuration, or whether you want to go beyond that and use the APIs to further extend the application or better integrate with other environments, with other systems within your environments. Now, as mentioned, this webinar is focused on Dundas BI 5, so unfortunately I won't have the time to cover all those different capabilities today in this webinar. For those of you who are new to Dundas, we do recommend watching other webinars or getting a demo or just reading through our website and different videos and documentation to get started with Dundas BI. There's lots of material and content out there. As mentioned today, we'll just be focusing on the delta and the highlights of Dundas BI 5. Okay, so without any further ado, let's focus on Dundas BI 5. As mentioned earlier, our motto is to make sure you can always achieve your requirements. Or in other words, we offer the flexibility you need so you can have unlimited possibilities. In Dundas BI 5, we really focus on making sure you can achieve those unlimited analytics possibilities with even greater ease. Possibilities that either require more technical solutions or complex setups are now made much easier in Dundas BI 5. We did that with over 150 new features spread across the entire applications but grouped into three major categories: advanced visual analytics, ease of integration, and superior user experience. Let's drill down into the first category. Dundas BI 5 features many new functionalities designed to eliminate the need to go back to the data preparation layer and spend more time structuring your data to be visualized as needed. Instead, we try to provide some advanced analytical capabilities right in your visual data discovery experience. We did that by offering new advanced formulas for predictive analytics, new type of data relationship visualizations, and new type of visual interactions, allowing you to get answers to your questions faster. Let's switch to Dundas BI 5 and go through a quick demo of those new features. Okay, so here I am in Dundas BI 5. This is the getting started tutorial that users will see once they first log into the application. And what I'm going to show you first is two new formulas we've added in Dundas BI 5 to enable predictive analytics without having to be an advanced statistical user using R scripts or your own specific formula that you've created in the data preparation layer. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new metric set. And with this metric set, I'm going to use a data set that is showing me order quantities over time. So I'm going to drag and drop this order quantity here and bring in data over time. As mentioned, I'm going to group it by, in this case, the month level. Now, Dundas BI will automatically choose the best type of visualization for me. In this case, it's a line chart showing me very nicely the trend over time. And one of the things I could have done before Dundas BI 5 is to go into this revisualize menu, expand that, and maybe use a new trend line to maybe see how this data will behave in the future using that trend line. So what I'm getting here is a very good prediction using a linear regression of how this data will behave in the future. If this data will continue using the following pattern, maybe not taking into consideration July 2017 as a complete data point, I am expected to see my order quantity to grow in the future, and that seems to be quite accurate based on the pattern I'm seeing on the actual data I have. Unfortunately, the linear regression is not taking into consideration the actual seasonality I have in my data. So it's showing me a straight line predicting the future without taking into account the fact that some of the months may be higher and some of the months may be lower. That's the drawback of using a linear regression. Starting from Dundas BI 5, you'll see a new option in your visualize menu, which is actually giving you the option to do a forecast analysis, which is taking into consideration much more the actual seasonality I have in my data. So you can see here now the new forecast generated for me by Dundas BI 5. When I click on this forecast analysis, what Dundas BI 5 did, it actually went through my current data set, ran a few tests against that data set, and basically optimized the best variable to produce an exponential smoothing forecasting on this data set. So you can now see the forecast in this blue line into the future, and you can see that's taking into consideration the fact that I do have different seasons, different values for different seasons in my data. And it's also generating a confidence level interval for me, which is basically that blue area showing me the upper and lower confidence interval using a 95% confidence level by default. So that means that within 95% certainty, my data points in the future will fall somewhere within this range. And of course, as I go forward, the bigger the range is, because the less accurate that forecast can be going forward, and that's why we need to expand those boundaries to make it more accurate. So in short, as you can see here, the forecast is not as optimistic in terms of the growth of the order quantity going forward, because it's attributing much more weight into the more recent data points. So because July 2017 is quite low, the forecast into the future is also low as well. But again, you can see the forecast do take into consideration the fact that I have seasonality in my data. Now, if I were to select this data point here, this July 2017 data point, and filter this data point out, just exclude that selected data point, Dundas BI will now go ahead and recalculate that forecast, and will now show me a much more optimistic forecast in the future, showing me the fact that the data is expected to grow and expand in the future much nicer. So a great way to allow me to see how the data is expected to behave in the future, taking into consideration not just the overall values I'm expected to see, but also the actual seasonality. So if you listen carefully, what I mentioned is that Dundas BI behind the scene is using a forecasting formula based on exponential smoothing. If you want to see exactly what values we've used to generate the calculation, you can expand on the data analysis panel the different measurements. So in this case, the forecast of the order quantity. You can expand the formula behind it, and you can see this is the exponential smoothing formula I was talking about. And these are the different variables we've used in it. The date variable, the order quantity, and then a lot of different variables to optimize the formula. If you are used to the exponential smoothing formula, you know that this formula expects things such as the number of seasons I have in my data. So in this case, I have 12 seasons, 12 months within the year. These are the seasons I have. How lengthy do you want the forecast to be? How many periods for do you want to predict? The alpha, beta, and gamma variables. These are all variables that Dundas BI automatically computed for me and entered into the formula. And of course, I can modify those if I want to be more specific about the forecast and use my own specific values. Now, we do know that this is a bit more advanced, so we provide two different ways to access that formula when you're creating that from scratch and not using the forecast analysis button from the revisualize. One would be just simply using the forecasting formula, which is a more simplified version of the exponential smoothing formula with different variables such as the time axis, the measurement, and then the length of time and the number of seasons I have in my data. Or, as mentioned, you can go ahead and use the exponential smoothing, and you can see many more variables available to you within this formula to go ahead and optimize exactly the way you want to compute. You can also provide a bigger value to the number of passes Dundas BI will apply to the data in terms of computing the best optimal variables. So a lot of options available here. And by the way, we'll go in more in deeper details about this forecasting formula in an upcoming webinar in the next month, explaining you more about the options of predictive analytics in Dundas BI 5. Okay, let's move forward to the second formula I want to show you. And again, I'm going to create a new metric set. Okay, so I'm going to use a different data set here to showcase the second formula I want to show you. As you can tell by the name of the data set, this is called cluster data. I want to show you now how you can use Dundas BI now to do clustering, how to find different categories in your data set, different groups within your data set, without having to go back into the data preparation layer and using our scripts to maybe inject a k-means transfer calculation, or maybe any other type of clustering algorithm you want to apply. So again, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to just drag and drop in the data set, and you can see here in this data set, this is actually showing me different sample IDs across different variables, different measurements. Think of it maybe as your data set, which represent different customers. So each one of the IDs is a customer ID, and then the X variable and the Y variable can maybe represent the income of that customer, maybe the average spending, the age of that customer, the sex, whatever type of variable you want to have to describe this customer behavior. Now, what I can do now in Dundas BI 5 is I can go into the add formula option here and just start typing in clustering formula. So as I type in clustering, it will show me that formula. And now I can inject in that formula different variables I will use to find the different clusters within my data and the way each sample IDs should be associated with that cluster. So for example, here, let me add a variable X and then the variable Y, and I can keep on adding as many variables as I have. And finally, I can also add the number of clusters I expect to see in my data set. So for those of you who are familiar with the k-means algorithm, I'm basically capable of specifying the k in advance, or just let Dundas BI automatically go through the data and try to find the best number of clusters I have for this data set. And this is exactly what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to let Dundas BI automatically predict the number of clusters I have, not just the association with the clusters, but also the number of clusters I have in this data set. So I'm going to apply this, and now Dundas BI will go through the data set and compute a new calculation, a new expression, showing me the actual cluster this sample ID should belong to. So you can see cluster 14, and then if I scroll down, some data sets will belong to some of the sample IDs will belong to a different cluster. Many of those belong to 14. Let me try and find something that doesn't. Here we go. So sample ID number 393 belongs to a cluster number 10, for example. But of course, I don't stop here. I can go in and revisualize this in a more expressive way. So if I go into the visualize button, maybe I'll use a scatter plot and see each one of the sample IDs, each one of my customers within a dot on this diagram. And if I go into my visualization binding, I can now move some elements around. So I can say, for example, instead of using the formula that I just created as another series in my data set, I want to use that to color my different data points. So under the color, I'm just going to add here the clustering expression I just used. And Dundas BI will now automatically color the different clusters of my data set based on that cluster prediction. I can even go into my properties and play with this automatic coloring that the Dundas BI generated for me, and maybe even go with more extreme colors. Maybe I'll use one of those colors, and now you can see greater distinction between the different groups Dundas BI identified within my data set. So that's a very quick way to do it on the metrics set designer. I could, of course, also do it in advance within my data cube. So if I open my data cube here with the cluster data, I can also inject here this same expression, this clustering formula, exactly the same way as I would have applied in my formula expression. But the advantage here is that I can now control how the output will look like. So in my process result, I can obviously rename that, but I can also provide that as a hierarchy versus as a measurement, my cluster prediction. And this now gives me the power to create a new metric set and use the same data set I just used. So drag and drop the X and Y, drag and drop my sample ID. Dundas BI will find that the best way to visualize that is using the scatter plot again. And now I can go into my visualization and drag and drop into my bindings the cluster prediction. And again, similar result with the cluster prediction done this way, but now it's much easier for me to go in and automatically get that cluster prediction showing a greater distinction between those different colors, because it's not coloring automatically based on a range, it's coloring based on different categories I have in my data. In this case, each one of the categories is the cluster, the customer IDs or the sample ID that I just predicted belong to. Again, this functionality as well will be covered in greater details in our upcoming webinar in February about predictive analytics. And what I'm going to do now next is move to the next type of advanced visual analytics functionality with Dundas BI 5, which is focused on relationship types of visualization. And I'm going to start with the first type, which is the new tree diagram. So let me create a new metric set here. Oops. And this time I'm going to use an existing data structure. In this case, I have my sales data structure. I'm going to focus on my sales year to date. And I'm going to start bringing in some hierarchies I have in my data. So for example, my territories, as well as my different salespeople, the first name of those salespeople. Again, as I do that, Dundas BI automatically finds the best ways to visualize that by default. In this case, it's a bar chart with the different groups within my bar charts. And I can, of course, expand and collapse and kind of minimize the different groups. But as you can tell, as I start expanding the different categories, it gets quite convoluted. So what I can do instead is I can actually go in here and revisualize this and use one of 4 types of relationship diagrams or visualizations we have now in Dundas BI. In this case, it's the tree diagram right here. So I'm going to click on that, and right off the bat, you can see here a very neat way for me to see the data organized by those different categories. So you can clearly see I have 2 different groups for my territories. I have Canada and the US, and then under each one of those territories, I have 3 salespeople and then more salespeople under the US, organized in a very easy to see way. Each one of those nodes, each one of those data points is colored by the actual value of that measurement. In this case, the sales year to date. The darker the color is, the more sales I can see for that specific category. And again, in a very similar way, I can interact with data just by right-clicking it and start expanding and collapsing it. So for example, if I expand the US, you can now see the different states, and then within each of the states, I can see the salespeople, and very easily I can now see how that's organized across different groups of data. So that's one way to do it using the tree diagram. And by the way, the tree diagram doesn't have to stop with visualizing information using those dots and the colors of those dots. I can even apply some visual properties to it to better represent my data. So for example, I can go into my properties, and you can see here under the nodes, I have a property here that allows me to specify a path for my images. So I can click on that and now add a different placeholder that represents my different values. So in this case, the placeholder I want to use is the member. And if I have the right image for that member, so for Canada, I have the flag of Canada, and then for different salespeople, I have the image of that person, I can easily bind that to my visualization. So here I have this folder with the different pictures, and within that path, I've specified a placeholder for the member. And as I apply that, you can easily see now the different images representing the different people or the different countries within my data set. So a very neat way to organize my information. I have other visual properties I can apply here. I can maybe organize this vertically. Maybe this can be your organizational chart. Maybe you want to use this to represent the bill of material. Many different visualizations will be working very nicely with this type of tree diagram visualization, which, like all other types of visualization in Dundas BI, is extremely interactive, as you just saw. Okay, the next type of a relationship visualization we've added in Dundas BI 5 is the core diagram. And for that one, I'm going to create a new metric set. And for this one, I'm just going to use the data set I have on my desktop. It's not even yet in Dundas BI. I'm just going to bring in this telecom churn data file, just drag and drop it onto my browser. And this will now show me the information of different subscriber churn rates moving from one telecom provider to another. So I have the original company, AT&T. I have the destination company, Sprint, for example, and I can see there's 1,034 subscribers that moved from AT&T to Sprint in the time period I have for this data set. And maybe I want to see it in a different way. Maybe I want to drag and drop the destination onto my columns and create this type of pivot table that shows me the move from one company, from one telecom provider to another. This is a fictitious data we just came up with for this sample, not real numbers. I should specify that. And then going into this data set, I can now very clearly see the relationship between one source and one destination. But to see the other way around, this actually takes some time. I need to now find across the columns the right combination, again, to see the bidirectional movement of the data. If I go in and revisualize this data set to that new type of visualization we had in version 4, the chord diagram, now I can very easily see the movement between those two different sources, or those two different telecom providers in this example. So if I want to see the interrelationship between those different data sets, the core diagram is actually very useful from that perspective. Now, at first glance, this can be a bit confusing, but how do you actually read this visual? But it is, again, very interactive and allows me to very quickly see, once I know how to read this, the movement between those different sources. So for example, if I look at this core, this specific branch between US Cellular and Sprint, I can see from US Cellular, there's 4,000 subscribers to move to Sprint, and the other way around, I had less than 2,000 doing that change. So one good example, and what's more obvious is, for example, that movement right here from Sprint to a Verizon Wireless. I can see from Sprint, I lost almost 4,000 subscribers moving to Verizon. On the other way, I only had less than 400 moving from Verizon to Sprint. So a great year from Verizon being able to move a lot of subscribers from Sprint into their organization. A very quick way to see that without having to read the bidirectional information on each one of the combinations. Okay, let's move forward with a new type of interaction with value in Dundas BI 5, and this type of interaction is designed to enable you to do grouping of your data on the fly. So again, I'm going to start with a new metric set. This is typically where you're going to start your visual data analytics experience in Dundas BI 5. So what I'm going to show you now is a very simple solution, very cool solution to a common problem you have around the way you want to organize your data when you analyze it on the fly. So I'm going to use here some sales data. Again, this is a very simple data set, just so you can understand the point, but this obviously can be applied to any data set. I'm going to drag in some sales numbers across different locations, different territories I sell in. I'm going to right click and sort this data set by the descending values of the sales. And now I can clearly see which one is my leading sales location, which one is my bottom sales location. Now right in the middle of the pack here, I have some information across the UK, France, and Germany. But in fact, my European territory is actually grouped as one sales region within my organization. I only have one sales manager for it and one sales office. I don't want to break it down to different countries. I actually want to see that as a single unit. Back before Dundas BI 5, I had to go back to the data cube, create a calculated expression that checks for the values, see that each one of the values represent that specific country that belongs to the European territory, and then group that into that specific category. Starting from Dundas BI 5, I can just select those data points just by using my cursor, right-click those, and then group those together just by using this group member option. Now again, using this selection, it automatically populates the values I want to group, but I can even open this drop-down here and add additional values, maybe if it's harder to select those with my cursor. And I can just come in here and provide a caption for this new group. And once I apply that, as you can tell, Dundas BI automatically created a Europe group for my data, and that's now my leading sales territory when the values are grouped. A very common problem that's not necessarily that complicated to solve, but does require a lot of time. And doing that on the fly using the visual selection of the data points makes it much, much easier for me to explore the information the way I want to. And of course, I can group it, I can ungroup it. Maybe I want to just see the not all the European countries, but just the EU-based countries. I can easily apply that with those selection on the fly without having to go back into my data model and applying that specific selection. So very neat and easy way to do that type of grouping. Another type of grouping I want to often apply is whenever I'm looking at my data, especially when I'm looking at across different types of visualization such as pie charts. Especially in the pie charts, the more slices you have, the harder it is to read and really understand the pie chart. This is why pie charts gain such a bad name in the world of best practices for data visualization. And what they usually recommend is to have a pie chart limited to 3 or 4 slices, so you can easily understand the top leading slices of your pie, and then the rest will be kind of contributed to a separate value. So how do I do that? Again, I could have gone in and select all those data points and group them into another, or I can just do it dynamically just by editing this metric set, and next to my top and bottom measurement category I had in previous version, I now see a new option to choose a group measure to group different data points into another group. If I use that on my cells, I can now specify different rules. So for example, I can specify a fixed value, a position value, or a total percentage value. So for example, I can say, well, you know what, I want to only pick the top 3 slices I have in my data, so top 3 positions, and everything else, all the other data points should be grouped into another category. So that's all I need to do, just apply those simple settings, and now you can very quickly see my biggest slice is all the other countries or continents and territories, and then I have 3 slices representing the top 3 locations I sell in. Similar to that, I can also change the rule, and maybe instead of positional, I can go in percentage rule and say I want to see everything with 10% and above. So now I'm getting Australia as well, which is a slice that has more than 10% in sales across different locations. So a very neat way again to automatically organize and generate a visual with the right grouping of my data without having to predefine that in my data preparation layer. Now, so far I showed you a lot of nice and cool options to now visually explore and interact with your data. All those options I've demonstrated so far in the metrics designer, where you want to do a lot of your data discovery. But some of the options we've added in Dundas BI 5 are also applicable to the dashboard level, where you apply different types of interactions to be used more by the consumers, by the viewers of the dashboard, which are not necessarily doing active data exploration, are just pointing and clicking on different data points just to see the values the way that someone designed for them to see in the most efficient way. And for that purpose, we've added a new type of data point interactions and selections. And I'm just going to go over to a new dashboard to demonstrate this type of functionality. So I'm going to create a new dashboard here. I'm going to use a blank one. Similar to the way I can drag and drop data onto the Metrics Designer and start visually exploring it, I can do the same on the dashboard level. So I'm just going to expand my data connectors here and the GDP by country data set, and just drag and drop the GDP per capita as well as the country. Now I can interact with it the very similar way I can do it on the Metrics Designer. Just revisualize, go into a maybe a bar chart, zoom out of here, apply the sorting, very similar type of interactions right here on the dashboard level as well. The interesting thing here on the dashboard designer is I can go into this visual and apply different types of unique interactions I want to expose to the consumer of this dashboard. So going to the properties of this bar chart, I can scroll down to the bottom, and there's lots of different types of actions available to me that I can inject right into this design, right into this visual. So for example, on a data change, I can fire some kind of a filtration, or on a click event, I can navigate to a different dashboard. Now the new one we've added in Dundas BI 5 is this selected data change action that allows me to do different types of interactions whenever the user chooses specific types of data points. So for example, right here I'm going to expand this selected data change. I'm going to add a filter action here. Now on this filter action, Dundas BI will automatically generate parameters for me to automatically bind the data to those different selections, but I can also change the mapping that is generated for me. In this case, I'm happy with the default settings. I can just go into the view. Sorry, I'm going to apply one more property change. I'm going to go into the properties, go into the look, and switch from the hover to select the data points to click to select data points. So basically, I'm going to fire this type of action, this data selection change action, only when the user clicks on the data points versus just hovering over. So that can give me maybe a combined experience. When I hover over, I'm going to expose some tooltips, and when I click, I'm going to do something else, in this case, filter my data. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to go into the view mode and just select a few data points, and now you can see the chart automatically filtered on that selection. So a very quick and intuitive way for the user to focus on specific data points without having to go in here and zoom in, zoom out, or use other types of interactions such as filter controls, just by pointing, clicking, selecting, and then having the chart automatically filter the data points. And again, that's just one example to the way I can use this new selection data change interaction. I can apply any other type of action such as layer changing, navigation, custom brushing. All those things can be triggered by this data point selection the user applied. Now finally, the last type of a new functionality I want to show you on this category of advanced visual analytics is the option to do so on top of a visual geographical data. So I'm going to create here a new dashboard again. And onto this dashboard, I'm going to add a new type of visualization. In this case, it's going to be a map visualization. And I'm going to make it slightly bigger so we can use more real estate that's available to us on this dashboard. And I'm going to drag and drop some earthquake events data. So basically, this is a recording of different earthquakes happening around the world. And I can just drag and drop those directly onto my visual bindings. I'm going to go into my symbols and expand that. And I'm going to populate this by the latitude and longitude of this data set. So I'm going to drag and drop the latitude again. And the date time will be what's representing each one of those events. So I'm going to drag and drop that into the name. And what you can see here, Dundas BI automatically plotted a symbol on this geographical world map of each one of those earthquake events. Now the problem with this visual is that it's very hard for the user now to actually tell how many events happen in a specific location the moment a lot of symbols are covering each other. So in Dundas BI 5, what we allow you to do now is come in here into this visual bindings again and bind data into this heat map property right here. So I can go in here into daytime and drag and drop that. And now what you can see here is those very visual indication of this very deep visual indication of how dense a specific event is in a specific location. So you can see here as I go and view this, There's, of course, a lot of earthquakes happening around this region of the world, and as I zoom in further and further, you can see that breakdown of those different events splitting across the different locations. Now, to make this even more interesting, I'm going to use a new functionality we've added in Dundas BI 5, which is actually part of the next category of enhancements I want to talk about, the integration category. And this one is around the ability to go in and integrate with any other type of map provider I want to use in my map visualization. So instead of using just the Dundas BI Esri shape files that they are populated out of the box, or dropping in my own shape files I want to use, I can now integrate with any other type of map provider that my organization may be using, or a new one I want to bring into Dundas BI. And the way I do that is very simple. I just go into my properties, and I'm going to choose now on my map to show street level mapping, and I can now choose a specific type of provider. And you can see we pre-populate this drop down with a lot of different providers: ArcGIS, Bing Maps, Carto, Mapbox, and you can expand that further. You can basically provide any type of map provider you want to use. If you want to use OpenStreetMaps or others, endless options for you to populate in here. I'm going to use the ArcGIS color one in here, and very quickly now you can see this map pre-populated as well with this ArcGIS map visualization. And now when I go and view this and zoom in further, I can actually go down into very detailed levels. So I can go down beyond the country level, maybe here focusing on San Diego, and even down to the actual street level, and seeing those different types of earthquake events happening. Maybe this can be an indicator for me for the neighborhood I want to live in, or type of house I want to buy if I'm investing in a certain area. Is that prone to be in a risky area with a lot of earthquakes, or is that a safe area to live in? Okay, so with this heat map, we conclude the first part of this webinar, where I wanted to show you some of the new enhancements we've added around advanced visual analytics, and we can now move forward to the second category of enhancements, which is around simplified system integration for everyone. As you just noticed with the map integration sample I just demonstrated, in Dundas BI 5 we've taken care of many complex integrations into your overall technology stack and made those readily available to you without having to go through custom development. The first example for that is new built-in data transformations, allowing users to use Python right in Dundas BI. You heard me mentioning R analysis a few times earlier when I was demonstrating new predictive analytics formulas. And now, similar to how you could have used R, you can also use Python. Together with R, these are the two most popular languages for advanced statistics, machine learning, and other artificial intelligence models. Users can now generate a new data set based on the Python script, or inject their Python script right in the middle of the data flow, and then use Dundas BI to visualize and interact with results. Supporting both Python and R means that our users are no longer forced to learn a different language. They can just use the language they're already comfortable with and perform their advanced data scientist tasks. This functionality as well will be further demonstrated in our next webinar coming up in February. The next enhancement we added gives the ability to set up an incremental data storage within Dundas BI. In essence, it allows you to reduce the load on your data sources when queried, and instead of pulling all the data required for your analysis up front, it allows you to only query for new data since the last time data was loaded in Dundas BI. If you are not using live queries against your data, and instead you are pulling data into Dundas BI in-memory engine or into Dundas BI warehouse on a schedule, you now have the option to limit those data extraction processes by limiting it to new data added to your sources. Now these first 2 points I just talked about are new options to use under the data preparation layer, what we call data cubes. As you just saw, the options to integrate with any map provider is a new integration we enabled on the visual layer. Now, I do want to stress again one more point on the map integration, and that is that we allow you to use almost any map provider available out there simply by using a simple configuration. So if you already have licenses with a certain mapping services, you can now easily leverage that investment right within Dundas BI. Next, we have new types of data connectors. We are constantly adding not just new types of visualizations, but also new types of data connections. In this case, next to the new DB2 connection that allows us to better leverage store procedures within DB2, we also added a JDBC data connector. Similar to ODBC, this opens up the connection options to any source that features a JDBC driver, such as many big data Hadoop-based environments does. Finally, the last point of integration is the new ability to deploy Dundas BI on PostgreSQL databases. Up until Dundas BI 5, the application database of Dundas BI had to be SQL Server. And while SQL Server is a great database to run on, it also requires licenses from Microsoft. So if you're looking to lower your total spending on that front, or simply prefer using the most popular open source database in the world, starting from Dundas BI 5, you can now deploy on a Postgres database as your application database. By the way, if you already developed content on an older version using SQL Server as your backend, and you want to now move to a new Dundas BI instance running on Postgres, you can easily export and import your content into the new version as well. Okay, let's move back into some more visual features and dive into our third area of enrichment, superior user experience. Similar to the way the new integration is designed to help all types of users in Dundas BI 5, the same goes for superior user experience, which is designed to help not just the data consumers, but also the analysts, developers, and even administrators. Consumers will obviously find easier ways to access the content, but when it comes to analysts and developers, they'll find new ways to easily share or control the way they share their insights with different users. From the administration perspective, you'll find much easier ways to not just control the access to different views and dashboards and reports created in the environment, but also easier ways to control the entire health of the system with a new admin central view. Let's go back into Dundas BI and see some of those features in action. So we're back onto the dashboard where we finished up with our previous demo. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go back to the home page on the top left. So I'm just going to click on this home button icon. And this will take me to the new home page we've developed that's really applicable to all types of users, but definitely helps the most the consumers. So you'll notice that the options to create new content and perform data discovery actions is still available here, but that's available here on the left-hand side. And then most of the real estate is dedicated for helping users finding new content. And that can be done through the search on the top left-hand side, or just by scrolling and seeing those different visuals representing the different views in the system. As I'm scrolling down in the system, you can see here this nice breadcrumb updating to where I am in the current scroll. I can, of course, click on each one of these elements and go back up to the right item. Now, within each one of the subsections, so for example, dashboards under Getting Started with Dundas BI project, I'll see the number of items I have, so it can give me a good indication of how busy that folder or that area in the application is. And of course, I can also switch very quickly between different projects on the top right-hand side. Now, if I don't like the visual view and I prefer to have a grid layout, there's an option here available to me on the right-hand side. And again, I can see those small thumbnails showing me a small visual of the different views, but the focus here is definitely on the name of the different elements, as well as who created that element, when it was created, and when it was last modified. So good information to help you understand if that's an object that has been recently touched, or that's the most recent version of that specific object. We kept the customize home option, so if you've used the customize home option in the past to select just a set view dashboards and reports you want to have on your homepage, that's still available to you. That will still work the same way as it worked before, but you definitely now have the option to provide an easier experience to the content consumers without having to go for the customize home and just use the default out-of-the-box navigation that's available to you with Dundas BI 5. Now, as I mentioned, we don't just enhance the experience for the consumers, we also help other types of users. If I look at the administration type of users, you can click on the administration icon here, and this will take me to not just the panel of all the administration options that we used to have in previous version, but also a new homepage designed to help administrator control the overall environment. So at the top here, you'll see different messages helping you to understand if there are different warnings or error messages in the system. In this case, there's a warning about the fact that my license is about to expire in the next 60 days. It's all very interactive, so I can click on view, go to my licenses page, check what needs to be replaced. Same goes with the overview. I can see how many active sessions I have right now in the environment, how many logs on in the past 24 hours, running jobs, accounts, how many tenants and active servers I have. And then some generic, or not generic, but the basic server information available to me to have a quick access to important information I may need at times to better manage and control the environment. And down below, we're showing you some statistics around the CPU usage as well as the memory usage of both Dundas BI, so that will be in the CPU, the application pool usage, and in memory, that will be the application memory, and then of the overall server and the environment you're running on. So this will be the lighter blue in terms of server usage, and the lighter orange in terms of the total in-use memory for the entire server. So a very quick access to get some vital indicators around how your system is performing within the infrastructure where you've deployed it. So again, a very quick access for administrators. Switching between administrators to the next type of users we help with a superior user experience, that will be around the developers. Let me open a data cube here that I've created in advance. Okay, quickly switch to my project here and open this data cube right here. And what you can see here, this is a data cube that has a very simple process. I have some sales orders, and I'm filtering to see only the one that has more than 2 orders, and then my actual process result. Now, before version 5, you always had the option to expand the data preview and then take a look at the data available to you within that current transformation. However, you were missing some important information that required maybe additional steps in the system to understand that information before you can move forward and validate some of your actions. For example, if you wanted to know how many records are available to you within this current transformation. So that's available to you right now from the statistics visual indicator right here. And you can also click on it and then dive deeper and see more advanced statistics on this type of information. So I can see here, for example, how many distinct carrier tracking numbers I have, or how many order quantities I have in terms of the sum, average, minimum, maximum, distinct order quantities. Same goes with other measurements and other dimensions I have in my data, such as the date, the maximum date, the minimum date, and so on. Now, for example, here I have applied a certain transformation, in this case to filter the data to show just more than 2 orders. If I click on this transformation, you can now see the statistics updating for that current selection. So I can see now I moved down from over 100,000 to 32,000 records. When I click on it, I can see I have a different number of distinct order quantities, for example, or a different number for the average. Now my average order quantity is a 5.3 versus a 2.5, I think, when I used to see all orders, including orders that had only 1 or 2 line items. So as you can see, very quickly I can now validate the different actions, different transformation I'm applying to my data model simply by going to the data preview button and using that new statistics functionality we're populating on each one of the transformation as I move forward with my data process. So very useful and very handy tool to help those who are preparing data models for other users. One more enhancement, and that's applicable for all types of users, mostly I would say for the analyst, and that would be available to you under My Profile. If I open My Profile, you'll notice here that we have a dialog here allowing me to access exports I perform in the system. If I open this dialog, I can see all the past exports I have in this instance, and I can see here, for example, a few days ago I've downloaded a dashboard called Earthquake Heat Map Analysis, both in the PDF format and in Excel format. I can now actually re-download this file. I can re-access it. It's available to me right here once I click on this button. And now I can compare the current results of my data versus past results I had when I previously downloaded this file. So I can actually do time over time comparison using those snapshots I have from previous exports I've generated in the system. If I have a very long a report or dashboard that takes quite some time to export, I can also see it under here under the queued export. So I can generate the export, keep on working in the system, come back to the queued export dialog here. Right now I don't have any, but once it's completed, I'll be able to see here all the other exports that are currently in process and then use those and access those directly from here without having to wait for that process to finish. So again, if you have multi-page reports that takes more than a few seconds to generate the export, I can still access those later with this new dialog. Finally, one more functionality I want to show you, which is applicable mostly for content creators. That would be around the ability to really further personalize and customize the way the user experience will work for the ultimate consumer of the dashboard. So here's a nice dashboard I've designed, which is very specific in terms of the way I want the users to consume it. Now, if I go into the edit mode of this dashboard, before I go to the edit mode, if I right-click this visual now, you can see I have the option to go and revisualize it, and I can switch into any other type of visualization that I'd like as a consumer. Now, at times this can be confusing for the users, or even just overwhelming and misleading in cases where the user doesn't know which type of visualization to use, and then may go to something that doesn't make too much sense with the data. If they ignores the recommend list of visualization here at the top, and then he goes to something else, he may go into different types of visualization which are not really going to help him in terms of his exploration of the data. So previous to Dundas BI 5, you could have limited the user from having the option to access the revisualize menu, for example, or access any type of option available to here on the right click context menu. Problem is that those functionalities apply to the entire system. So if I denied the user from revisualizing any type of visualization, this would apply to all the visuals on the dashboard for that user, not just to one specific visual. Now, if I want to really have that fine-grained control and just limiting that type of visualization, I had to use scripts. Now in Dundas BI 5, I can just go into edit mode, select this visual, and in my properties, I now have a new menu allowing me to disable some application privileges. So I can say, for this visual, I don't want the user to be able to access the revisualize menu, and maybe not even the option to add notes. And I can do the same not just for the application privileges, but also for the revisualization option. So for example, the revenue by product, maybe for that type of visual, I want the user to be able to access only a bar chart and a pie chart. I don't want the user to be able to go in here and switch this to a bubble chart, for example. So now if I go into my view mode and right click this context menu, you can see the revisualize menu and the option to add note are both gone. The user cannot access those specifically for this visual. However, if I click on a different visual, you can see you can still add notes and still revisualize to all the different types of visualization. Same goes with this pie chart here. If I right click and go into the revisualize menu, you can see it's now limited only to the bar and the pie chart, and the user will not be able to go and switch into a different visual that is not available to him under this list. So very simple, very easy using that simple configuration to now have that fine-grained control in terms of the exact experience I want to provide to the user on a certain visual. And by the way, those functionalities are available not just at the visual level, but also at the dashboard level. So we have added the option to go beyond the user profile, the group profile, to now go to the dashboard level or the specific visual level with those application privileges and revisualization options. Okay, so that concludes the enhancement that I wanted to show you today around the superior user experience. The next topic is a brief recognition of all your great feedback. I want to really thank you all for all the input that you had about the usage of Dundas BI and how you would like to use the application. Lots of that feedback has been implemented to version 5, and you'll find a lot of nicer ways to access different functionalities that existed before, and maybe steps that required a bit more configuration. Now you can do with a few clicks or avoiding scripts altogether. Some may be smaller functionality, some may be bigger, some can enhance the performance. But all in all, I'm sure that each one of you that have used Dundas BI in the past will find out new functionalities in Dundas BI 5 that will make your life much easier and much more pleasant when working with the application on a regular basis. Okay, what's next for Dundas BI? So I didn't want to list too many items here. I want to basically keep it simple and tell you guys that our next versions, whatever we may call it, is really going to focus on faster insights design, and that really includes a lot of different elements in it. It's both around the way we can access the insights and find new insights in the system, so new ways to help the users to find the real issues that they can drive a change in the business, as well as new ways to deliver and share that content with other users that is not just easy to do, but also engaging and compelling. So other users will actually take that insight and turn it into actions when they're collaborating with them. So definitely a lot of new functionality you'll see around that topic, which, as I mentioned, is quite broad. And of course, you can stay tuned and hear more about it as we go along. Right now, I'm sure you have lots to play with Dundas BI 5, but keep in mind this is one of the items we'll be investing on a lot in going forward. And the second point, as always, is definitely keep on listening to you. As I just mentioned in the previous slide I shared, with a lot of different new functionalities we've added in Dundas BI 5. And by the way, I do recommend you go in and read the release notes and check the documentation on the website. I'm going to share with you some other avenues to learn more about Dundas BI 5 in a moment. You'll see a lot of those 100 new features I just mentioned earlier are actually derived by your feedback. And that will be the same absolutely in every version that we release. So please keep on sharing that with us. We want to keep on making sure that the solutions that we build are working the way you need to have the solution working for you and solve your real life business problems. So what's next for you? As I just mentioned, we do have detailed documentations, release notes on the our websites and the support sites. Lots of content available for you to consume. There's 2 upcoming webinars that will be focusing on new functionalities in Dundas BI 5, both a predictive analytics for all types of users, and that will be in February 21st to be specific. And then following that, exactly 1 month later, we're going to have 18 cool features of Dundas BI 5 that data people love, and again, spread across all types of users, ranging from consumers all the way down to developers and administrators. If you're a user of Dundas BI 5, you'll appreciate that webinar. We're also going to have training for Dundas BI customers on specific functionalities of Dundas BI 5. So you've probably received some communication on that, and if you haven't, keep your antennas up and make sure you check the emails and the communication coming from us. And if you miss all of that, definitely reach out to us and we'll point you into the right direction. And then go ahead and download and give it a try and let us know what you think of Dundas BI 5. If you are a new user to Dundas and to Dundas BI 5 altogether, there's different ways for you to try it out. You can, of course, start your trial today and download the product or do it online and play with your own data. Or you can just talk to us and we can arrange for you a demo. We can better understand your requirements and tailor that demo to be specific to your environments and your needs. And that's usually the best way I would recommend to get started with Dundas. Just tell us what you need and we can definitely tailor that experience to your specific requirements. Okay, so with that, I want to thank all of you for joining the webinar. Hopefully you're excited as we are about the Dundas BI 5, and I really look forward to hear more about your feedback and your experience using the application. At this point, I do want to open up the floor to some questions. We have a little bit of time left. Please feel free to type in your questions in the GoToWebinar questions panel, and we'll try to address those as much as possible in the remaining time. And again, in the meantime, I do want to thank you all for joining the webinar today, and looking forward to see your creations on the Dundas BI 5.